Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Amit Malik, and I am a global open banking and APIs lead within Accenture. This webinar, which you have just joined, is a part of Economists award-winning Global Treasury Leaders program sponsored by Deutsche Bank. The program aims to share insights and connect treasurers around the world with extremely curated activities throughout the year, including summits in different regions, webinars, white papers, interviews, and an online community where we host these webinars. Going back to today's webinar, which is about new age payments and making the most of instant payments and API in APAC, the idea is to make this session as interactive and as useful for you as possible. So please feel free to ask as many questions as you like using the chat facility in the webinar. Please do send back questions to us using the chat facility as soon as you think of them, and we will bring them up when appropriate during the course of this event. Without further ado, let me introduce our honorary guest speakers. We have Julien Chen, who is a Director and Group Treasury from Trip.com Group. We have Rishit Samrani, General Manager, Finance and Treasury, Bosch Limited, India. And we have Rachel Whelan, Managing Director, Global Head of Transactional FX Product Management and APAC Head of Cash Product Management at Deutsche Bank. A warm welcome to our speakers, and let's get on to the first topic. Before we get deep into the topic and understand the use cases and the market impact, let's get a bit of a context around the landscape. And possibly the first question here is for you, Julien. API usage is growing across many sectors. We have seen that happening, and travel industry has been at the forefront of this for many years. Can you talk a bit more about API usage within your sector?
Yeah, sure. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm the Group Treasurer of Trip.com Group. We are the largest online travel agency in Asia. On Trip.com website and our brand in Europe called Skyscanner, you can find 1.4 million hotels available in 200 countries, and our flight network covers 2 million individual flight routes. Because we're an online travel agency and we're a platform company, our business model is connectivity through API is fundamental, since we're connected with over 1 million suppliers. And the availability of hotels and the pricing information and the flight information are obtained real time in our business offering. For example, all the flight schedules and pricing informations are obtained from hundreds of suppliers and airline companies in real time through API, and then different flight route combinations are then calculated and displayed to customer. So the whole process only takes a few seconds. That can only be made possible through API. We also open up our business system to other OTA platforms or pricing comparison engines. So you find Trip.com deals on other platforms as well. So those are connected through API as well. For us, since our commercial or the business infrastructure is based on API connectivity, so finance has to be on API as well. Actually, we had our very first host-to-host connection with the banks through API in China as early as 2008. Within finance department, we have our own in-house development team and product team. So the idea is to make finance a product where we provide to our business unit like the accounting service, payment service, and foreign exchange service, for example, and tax service. So we build our accounting system and TMS around this objective. I can see the similar setups in other Chinese tech companies, especially those platform companies like Alibaba, etc. So I will pause here and hand it back to Amit.
Thank you very much. And as you can see, API usage is very prolific and prevalent within the travel industry, and it is one of the more mature industries from which we can learn. But getting back to payments and banking, India has been at the forefront of instant payments and APIs, especially with the unified UPI interface. Rishit, are you able to provide a bit more context and background to this?
Sure, Amit, and thank you for having me. Good morning and good afternoon to everyone. So my name is Rishit Samrani, and I am the General Manager, Finance and Treasury at Bosch in India. Bosch, as you know it, is a technology service provider, essentially in the field of mobility solutions, industrial technology, energy and building technology, and consumer goods. As far as UPI in India is concerned, it is definitely an interesting time for us here within India with regard to real-time payments, or UPI as we call it. In fact, in the month of September, India has done roughly around 3.65 billion transactions, and this has got an overall volume of roughly around $88 billion. So as you see, the scale of of UPI has been gigantic here in India, and that has been achieved, in fact, in a period of last 5 years. So the UPI was launched in May of 2016, and this is the scale that UPI has achieved in the last 5 years. So if I can give you some context around how we have been able to achieve this kind of a scale, it's largely been driven by the government and the Reserve Bank, which is essentially the central bank of India, the Reserve Bank of India. So if I give some context here, back in 2009, when this particular concept was conceived, the government essentially wanted to work towards financialization of individuals, because only 17% of the individuals had access to bank accounts. So at that point in time, the government started off with something known as Aadhaar, or essentially trying to provide a unique ID to every individual, which can enable with the eKYC for the banks, and which in turn can enable an opening of bank accounts. So Aadhaar essentially is a 12-digit code. It has got basic details of individuals like their names, their addresses, their gender. But at the back end, it has got one's handprints, their iris, or even for that matter, facial recognition. So what that did was that it essentially enabled people, essentially the marginalized section of the society, because it was rolled out pan-India, to have access to unique IDs. And people had multiple IDs at that point in time, but Aadhaar became synonym to ID in India. And at the scale the Aadhaar was able to achieve was around 1.2 billion people currently are on Aadhaar. Now, with the IDs provided, the government embarked on this journey of providing bank accounts to the marginalized section of society, which is essentially called Jan Dhan accounts, right? And the government was able to open around, I think, 400 million plus Jan Dhan accounts here in India. So now to move how the real-time payments or UPI kind of interfaces with this particular platform. So while the Aadhaar was conceived, which was around unique ID, we had the unified payment interface, which was conceived by the National Payments Corporation of India, obviously regulated by the Reserve Bank of India. Now, the endeavor here was to create an interoperable, low-cost, 24/7, a mobile-first interface. And once with the UPI launch, what happened is business to business, business to consumers, and more importantly, peer-to-peer transactions increased manifold, right? So the way in which it works is the UPI is essentially provided by the architecture is provided by the NPCI, but essentially it is provided by the banks, but distributed by Fintechs. So if I can give you an example, so if I really want to kind of purchase something from a vegetable vendor, then I just need to bring out my mobile phone, scan the QR code at the vegetable vendor, and then money gets transferred from my bank account. By the way, when I open my app, it is essentially provided by the fintech. So I open the fintech app, scan the QR code, and the money gets transferred from my bank account to the vendor's bank account. So as you see, what was essentially happening is we have been able to kind of distribute the UPI via the fintechs, and while being kind of regulated by banks, which has enabled us to kind of achieve the scale that India has been able to achieve. Again, it's around 3.65 billion transactions in September, and the overall quantum was roughly around $88 billion, and this is growing. Thank you.
Thank you, Rishit. Rachel, what are you seeing on the bank side? Are your customers, who are large corporates and enterprises, demanding APIs from you to integrate into their enterprise TMS or ERP systems? Is this already becoming a must-have offering from an incumbent bank?
Thanks, Amit, and hello to everybody. I suppose for kind of my view on it is it's really dependent on from a global perspective as well, and from a client segment perspective, and also from a client ask, it's really dependent on their kind of digitalization strategy and where they are on that journey, or if they have a strategy around digitalization. I think as well, I think different countries, different parts of the world, and as Rishabh said around India, there's a push, I think, for the usage of API, and UPI being the instant payments product that sits underneath that, but API as an integration layer to actually provide these payment services in the future. We are seeing in some markets that is actually a push coming from the regulators that is really kind of driving the momentum in some regions more than others. I think from a client perspective, we don't necessarily have clients knocking down the door, all clients knocking down the door, but what we do actually see is that clients are seeing the benefits of foundational type APIs, such as account balances APIs, credit notification APIs, etc., to help them to make more, to the benefit of operational efficiency for reconciliation purposes and things like that. So that usage is definitely something we see a higher uptick. So banks have to have that foundational API level available. That's a must-have. I think where we're seeing, so I suppose from a client segment perspective, like I would put our client segments in different categories. Our fintech clients absolutely expect API enabled. Zulin kind of described her whole business as API enabled. In terms of our or corporates that are traditional corporates, not necessarily asking for API yet because they're just not ready. Whereas I think our early adopters, and I said Bosch is definitely one of these in terms of early adopters, who are actually using APIs and want to use APIs to integrate into their end-to-end flows and actually allow them to differentiate from a solution perspective that they want to be able to provide out to their clients, or how they want to be able to provide solutions that provide additional kind of benefit to their underlying counterparties. What I think we are doing as a bank, we are definitely trying to integrate with ERPs and TMSs, and there is integrators coming from the fintech population to actually help solution that. And I think that is going to be how you get your mass usage of APIs, because I don't think clients are ready to actually be able to build or have the funding to build a totally API-enabled solution. So where we see clients that have as part of their strategy, and therefore this tech build is part of their future strategy and funded, they are definitely the ones that are coming and knocking down the door. But clients that are kind of hopefully want to use integrators, they're not necessarily knocking down the door just yet, but it's coming. It's the path, the direction of travel right now.
Thank you, Rachel. So clearly API usage, although not fully mainstream, is definitely going up. More and more clients, both fintechs and traditional enterprises, are asking for it. Let's see where our audience is in this space. Dory, can I ask you to bring the poll up? can I request the audience to select one of the following options so that we can do a real-time poll and understand what are you seeing in the market? Fantastic. Can we get the results on screen? Brilliant. And this is consistent with what we hear, that although not the full segment or the full spectrum is using it, clearly almost close to half of our audience has been involved in using APIs in some form. Brilliant. Let's move over to a bit more our next discussion topic, which is really trying to understand use cases and trying to understand what are the key use cases your organization has adopted. And we will start again with Julene. What are some of the key use cases your organization has adopted, and how are you benefiting from all of this?
Yeah, for us, well, so first of all, I think it's good to see that almost half of the participants company already using API in some sort of form. I'm not actually surprised. I thought that would be less. I think in China, it's very particular because of the rise of some very powerful tech giants, like we call them BAT, now, like Baidu, Alibaba, and Tencent, and some of those fintech companies. So some of those larger commercial banks offer API connectivities very early. Like I said, we connected with them since 2008 already. With us, we skipped the FTP file transfer stage altogether and went straight to API. One usage is definitely receiving real-time bank account balances and payment collection information into our TMS through API. There were times I was reading, and then some people were saying, do you need real-time information in your TMS system? I would say if we just have if it's on API alone to get the real-time bank balance into our system, I probably would say we probably wouldn't act on it. It's a lot of information, but we need that sort of information. However, in China, we also, like in India, we also have the real-time payment across different banks. So the API plus the real-time payment actually is quite powerful, I would say. And what a treasury could benefit from that is really, in the past, we always say, okay, we want to achieve no surplus cash balance at the end of the day, so we can maximize our usage of cash. But now with the API and the real-time payment, instant payment, I can achieve, if we want, we can achieve no surplus cash at any given time of the day, right? Almost, if it's required. So that means we, as Treasury, when we do cash planning, we don't need as much cash buffer as before. We can definitely increase the usage of cash, the efficiency of cash, and also have more money stay in the investment account or reduce our loan. So that is quite useful. The other thing that we use API is mainly on the FX side. We have a FX trading platform based in our treasury center in Hong Kong, where we currently connected with 4 banks. We would ask for quotations whenever we have customer orders coming in, and all those FX exposures are consolidated at every hourly basis. We would ask for quotation with those 4 banks, and then we would deal with them automatically through API with the best rates. In the past, I had experience working with like third-party FX platforms like FXO, for example. It works from a user perspective. I think it works similar, right? In the past, we would just, what the FX exposure we have, we would just put them in a file and then upload it to FXO in a designated folder. Then FXO would pick up those those deals and then get quotation. And then once the deal is done, the FX transaction comes back to our TMS. Now, from user perspective, I think it works similar, but maybe from a security, information security part, because our information didn't go to a third party platform, right? And it didn't placed in another folder. So everything is connected directly. So from that perspective, I could imagine that some company would benefit from API compared with the traditional file transfer format. Amit?
Thank you, Julien. That's very, very comprehensive. Rishit, what are you seeing? What use cases have you implemented? What else do you intend to do in the near future?
Yeah, sure, Amit. Again, what we have been able to do in our business, I think there are multiple use cases of API, but in our business, what we have tried doing is, again, leverage API and UPI and try and launch it at scale. Eventually try and benefit the consumer, which incidentally in this particular case, again, is a mechanic and again, a marginalized section of society. So if I can put this in some context, so within Bosch, we have an aftermarket division. And the aftermarket division is essentially into sales, services, and distribution of vehicle parts to our consumers. So what essentially happens is the aftermarket division sources lubricants and tries to sell it across our distribution channel, which is spread across India, around 800 plus distributors. And those distributors in turn will try and sell to the retailers, who in turn will essentially try and sell to the end consumer. And since it's a lubricant, it's an eventual mechanic who is a self-employed mechanic who's essentially the end consumer for this particular lubricant. Now, the good old practice has been that companies have been providing some sort of coupons so that the mechanic can avail cashbacks as and when they purchase the lubricant. And the practice is that the coupon will be available once the lubricant is opened. The mechanic will have to go back to the retailer and discount and collect the money. The retailer in turn will have to go back to the distributor. And finally, the distributor will have to kind of log in into the Bosch interface and try and claim credit in the form of credit notes towards forward purchases. So essentially, the process that we are looking for in the good old world was around 60 to 90 days, right? And obviously very cumbersome to that extent. Now with API and UPI, we have essentially been able to kind of cut this into seconds, if not minutes. So the way in which it works now essentially is that the mechanic has to purchase the lubricant, but then there is a QR code at the back end once the cap is opened. And with the help of their smartphone, they are able to kind of log into the Bosch interface. Once they log into the Bosch interface, they have to key in basic information and their bank account details. Now, as soon as they key in their bank account details, there is an API that gets triggered to a fintech. And essentially what we are trying to do in this particular case is trying to validate the bank account details so that eventually we don't end up paying to the wrong consumer. The fintech does that via the concept of penny drop. So 1 rupee is transferred immediately into the consumer's account, and the account is validated. Now, once the account is validated, the consumer needs to scan back the QR code again. And this doesn't need to happen on a repeat basis, because if you're a repeat customer, your process starts now. The QR code will again kind of trigger an API in this particular case to the DB platform, and then DB will basically kind of give the cash back to the consumer via the UPI interface. So the UPI interface per se happens in a matter of the UPI payment per se happens in a matter of seconds, almost real time in nature. But if you are the first-hand consumer, then it might take a couple of minutes because you're trying to log on to the particular platform. So yeah, that is the use case that we have been able to launch as far as UPI is concerned. The main benefits that we have seen obviously is that we have been able to approach the end consumer, which was never the case. Have been able to crash the time from 60 to 90 days to a few seconds. And finally, we are once you have the database for the consumer, you are able to curate the messages for the consumer. And with the help of our bank, we are also getting real-time reconciliation as and when the payments go out. So multiple use cases as far as this particular solution goes. More importantly, instant gratification that we are able to provide to the consumer. Thank you.
Fantastic. What a wonderful use case. Rachel, what's your view on key use cases, their maturity and adoption, both locally and globally? Are you seeing some regions ahead of others within this space?
So I think before I even start, I think without a doubt, India is way ahead of the space and really pushing the agenda. And I think that's a mixture of, like, from a regulatory perspective, so the RBI really pushing the regulations, but also the uptake and the approach to really, targeting the unbanked within that. So I think the mixture of UPI and API are really powerful within India across multiple use cases right now. And I think India is the charge within, really driving the charge ahead within the region and kind of globally as well. But I think from a bank perspective, I think kind of as I mentioned, the use cases we are definitely seeing is those, foundational use cases where clients are actually using APIs to get, balance information to allow them to do better reconciliations. But I think where I see it going, and I think, we really, from a bank perspective, we need to listen to our clients and listen to what the problems they want to solve and how they want to do business differently. Yeah, so the value chain, their clients are changing their value chains. The pandemic has changed people's approach to doing business. And you can see it with, across the board in terms of, direct marketing to consumers, direct kind of sell to consumers is a big kind of agenda point for a lot of our multinationals. So I think we really have to listen to our clients and build solutions that, exactly as Rishabh has described, give you multiple benefits. So I kind of really see from a bank perspective, our underlying products, FX, payments, liquidity, need to be embedded with API solutions that allow kind of integrated kind of workflows. So this integrated workflows that the bank can orchestrate on behalf of the client, can pull fintechs in to help on that as well. So I don't think banks are going alone on it, but actually that kind of orchestration of end-to-end flows, so you get the results that kind of Rishabh has just described. A 90-day process goes down to seconds, and that I think is really where we see the embedding of cover instant and APIs as part of the delivery. And I think clients, clients may not have visualized this so much yet. So I think banks are there to help, to advise, to understand the workflows, and actually really see how you can orchestrate those together and integrate the solutions that has the best fit for our clients.
Fantastic. And Rachel, as somebody who has been in this space and as you belong to a large global bank, do you think the API adoption is different across regions? Do you think APAC is ahead of the West or Americas, or is it comparative across all regions?
I suppose I could be called biased because I've lived in the APAC region in Singapore for 14 years now, so I definitely have I've definitely seen this market. This market is so forward thinking. The whole market is the whole kind of globe. So I think APAC is definitely leading the charge. But I do see, the Europe, Americas, Germany, obviously. I do see them driving that agenda and starting to pick up and starting to learn, and see what's going on in APAC. And our multinational clients are definitely part of that because, you have a presence in APAC, but therefore what you're doing as APAC is going back to headquarters. So I think that influence is there in terms of kind of driving the agenda towards API and the benefit that it gives you. But I do think that APAC is definitely ahead, and we're really, I think testing the boundaries of the use cases at the moment, which I think is great.
Fantastic. So the most important thing here is, of course, benefits, and we did hear a lot about it. We heard from Julien that APIs and access to instant payments, bring together convenient and innovative banking services. We heard from Rishit around how you have increased automation, reconciliation, reduced the time taken for a particular set of transactions, and how you're able to actually differentiate through APIs. Let's hear from our audience around what are the most significant benefits they see within this space. Dory, can you please bring up the poll? All right, let's close the poll and have a look at the results. Very, very interesting. So almost all organizations are using APIs for some specific use case, and it's good to see that 0% feel that there are no benefits to this, and this does not apply to them. Fantastic. All right, let's move on. We talked a lot about the market context, why it is relevant, what are the key use cases and their benefits, but it has not been smooth sailing. I think there are also challenges and considerations. This is not yet a very, very mature market, but we are hopeful that over the next few years, these things will mature and adoption rates will be very high. Julien, from your perspective, are you seeing availability of APIs and their maturity vary across your key markets in which you operate?
Yeah, for us at Trip.com, we have close to 1,000 bank accounts in China and another 1,000 bank accounts outside China. In China, with all the Chinese banks, we are able to receive like real-time bank balance. We have our RTP, and then but the problem is among the banks that we connect with API, the details that they provide us are not standardized, right? So that caused some problem for us. Like if we want to further enhance automation or some intelligence after the data that we collect, there is no consensus between banks, for example, like what are the information that they would make available through API interface. Some banks have some ideas according to their current client pool, and some other banks have a very different client profile, and they would make available some other information through API. So that's among the Chinese banks. And for us, I mentioned that I have 1,000 bank accounts outside China, and when we connect with international banks, Deutsche Bank probably is is the more digitalized like the bank, but for some of my other international banks, they don't offer API yet on the bank and balance. I can imagine that it's a lot of investment for the bank, right? If they go on this route, unless they have a real demand from a large number of their clients, it's difficult to push for that. I think in the past, a few years back, a lot of us, like the trend in treasury is to reduce the number of the banks that you work with in order to benefit from like cash concentration or cash pooling, etc., etc. But now we're kind of tied to those banks, and they don't invest in their API technology, etc. Like you're stuck there. And then now I have kind of like I manage my accounts in China and outside China very differently, and the analysis coming out from those accounts are very different because they don't give me the same information. So that's the first thing. And the other thing is for us treasurers, like I mentioned that briefly, once we have all those information available, say all the banks are on API, and we can get as much information as we want, as frequently as we want, what do we do with those information? Would that be too much information, right? So API alone is definitely not the objective, is to, through API, can we create more values for the company? Can we get better information which would feed back to the business and then benefit to our customers upstream or downstream? For example, I could see the API with real-time payments is really powerful. I would want to see like more like API with other financial product, or not only FX but maybe money market funds, like with account opening with banks, trade finance product, guarantees. I mean, I think I would want to see a bit more evolution toward this end. Amit.
Fantastic, fantastic. So clearly standardization or lack of common standards is a challenge. In Europe, we have seen several initiatives, including PSD2 and SEPA instant payments, which are trying to bring a standardization from a cross-border payments perspective, and also from an API standards perspective. Rachel, question for you: Are you seeing this as a big challenge from a cross-border payments and transactions perspective? Is lack of standard regulation hindering interoperability in APAC region?
So I suppose there's two pieces on it. If we're saying the cross-border side, obviously with the high-value payments, we've obviously got ISO and that the standardization of message protocols as part of ISO compliance. However, for cross-border in relation to instant and instant, a lot of the kind of providers in a lot of countries have made statements that ultimately they will accept cross-border, cross-currency transactions. However, there is no standards. So every single implementation of an instant scheme is different, and the message formats are different. So this is causing problems, and I think this is causing problems. You do see point-to-point connections. UPI to pay now to prompt pay. We are seeing that, but they are point-to-point connections, and I think this is standardization of message protocols around that will actually speed up the cross-border, cross-currency within APAC. However, you're looking at multiple regulators within this market. We're not talking about the Eurozone where you potentially can do PSD2. It is a much more complex regulatory market within APAC to actually develop those standards. But that is potentially the forward play that has to happen in terms of mass adoption and actually being able to really connect those instant to instant kind of solutions for clients.
Fantastic. And Rachel, if I would continue on that note and start to understand, what excites you most about this space if we look out into the next 3 to 5 year horizon? If you could have the folks here take away anything from this session, what would be your advice?
So I would say, to be honest, a few years ago, I would have said, would I be really excited about being in the payment space? I've been in the FX space for a while, and I think that's quite an interesting space and has continually been interesting. But the payment space was, we were in checks and standard ACH domestic payments. It has gone to a whole other level now, and this space is so interesting and so exciting and changing on a daily basis. And I think that's the thing. I think all of the new products, the new offerings that are coming out, that Fintechs are bringing to the party and actually working with banks to kind of solution, is very exciting. I go back to a point I kind of mentioned earlier. I think for me, what's really, really exciting about kind of what we want to grow and what we want to do kind of, I think, in DV with our clients is to be part of that kind of end-to-end solutions with clients. How do we give our client multiple benefits when we integrate, real-time payments to a real-time collections into a auto reconciliation and acceptance of that money, so that your reconciliation problems that we know appear are a massive piece for collections, that's embedded, and you've got your reconciliation done within seconds, because that's all embedded in an end-to-end workflow. So I think for me, that's kind of where is this going. I think it can go in many directions, and I think that's in itself is just what's very exciting about this space right now. And I think the other piece is obviously within the market. Central bank digital currencies are now coming into play, and what does that mean? What does that mean for us in the future as well within the payments landscape, and how that would be API enabled as well in terms of the future offerings that we may bring to clients.
Thank you, Rachel. And Rishad, if I may ask you to provide a few final comments on what do you think about this space in the next 3 to 5 years? Where do you think this is going?
No, so as far as India is concerned, I would say that real-time payments have essentially commoditized the financial industry in terms of making the payment. So making payments is no more a USP as far as any fintech platform is concerned. UPI has enabled this particular piece, and what fintechs are trying to do is essentially provide UPI as the front end, but then try to sell multiple other products, a suite of products to enable I would say users to come onto their platform. And yeah, as far as I think we discussed a lot about the application of APIs. So to that extent, APIs have multiple use cases, and it's definitely exciting as far as the opportunities in this particular space are concerned.
And Julian, from your perspective, what do you see happening in the next 3 to 5 years? What's most exciting in this space, and what are the key takeaways?
Sure. For me, I think we are right at the beginning of the era, already in the era of the digital economy, and I think in the next 3 to 5 years, all the majority business models can evolve, and we will be much more integrated with our final consumers, and the integration of data or information to for our suppliers, third parties, or our government and regulators are much more integrated and connected. So I'm really looking forward to that. And also, Rachel mentioned fintech. Yes, I think fintech definitely on the rise, and I'm looking forward to see how they will change the financial world, the current banking service, and traditional banks, and how do they react. So really looking forward to that.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you very much for that wonderful narrative. It has really been exciting to understand the background, the progress, and the future of instant payment and APIs, especially in the APAC region. Let's open up the Q&A, and if I can request our audience to start submitting questions to the chat window, I will pick some of them up and ask our guest speakers to provide their comment around them. I can already see one question in the chat window, and let me read this out. So with so many APIs out there, how does a company choose or prioritize what's right for their business needs? Julian, do you want to have a go at that and provide a perspective on how do you decide what's the right API for you to use?
Well, because we develop API in-house, so I'm actually not aware of like different API suppliers out there. For me, I think the thing is you cannot just look at API from only from the finance perspective. I think API changes the whole IT infrastructure of the company. So you probably have to look at that or select a supplier, API supplier, more from that perspective. And also, yeah, you can only look at API connectivity just from a treasury perspective, because that will require maintenance, support. Your current IT people probably will not be be able to support the API. So for me, I think they really need to look at from a business perspective, and choose the right API supplier that can serve the company for a longer time, instead of just looking at finance.
Yeah, and
Now,
I think,
Amit, can I add a point?
Go ahead.
So I think what Julian was mentioning was making a lot of sense. Essentially, APIs require a lot of IT interface, which essentially is cost. So if we are able to make a business case out of the API interface that we are trying to do, it's a much easy sell, is what I've realized.
And I think that's a fantastic point, and maybe I'll add a bit of a perspective here. I think the decision on what API to build or what API to consume from a third party will possibly be dependent on, what's your use case and business case. What is interesting though today is that most organizations who are providing APIs today do provide a bit of a sandbox environment where you can rapidly test out an API and understand the relevance or the useful of that API from your customer journey perspective and build your use case around it. And that's how you start to do a bit of a prioritization and understand what suits you. Rachel, I don't know if you have any comments on this topic in terms of how do you prioritize, how do you decide, or how do you advise on what's the right API to use?
Yeah, so I think again it goes back to, because to be honest, APIs, have been a bit of a buzzword. And when you have conversations with clients that I want an API, it has to go fundamentally back to what do you want that API to do? And I think that, like exactly what Rishabh said, what benefit do you think you want to get out of that API? What problem is that solving? How does that allow you to differentiate your value chain? So, and that becomes your business case. So that starts to be the kind of reason as to why. And I do think it is a technical journey. Yeah, so I think this is also, as companies decide to adopt APIs, you do have to have the technology strategy. You do have to have experts in that field that can then work with banks and use these sandboxes. We have a sandbox, we have an API kind of platform ourselves, portal ourselves, where clients can come in and do sandbox testing on this. But I think a big part of that is getting your agreement that this isn't important, and you get some technical funding behind it, because otherwise your value, your kind of use cases cannot be delivered. It is a journey that the business has to go on with your technology team as well.
Understood. And maybe there is an opportunity for me to ask another question here. And Rachel, you talked about ISO and how it will provide richer and higher quality payments data. And all across the world, we are hearing organizations or even geographies adopting ISO, and ISO is a part of payments regulation in many geographies. Probably a question to both Rishabh first and then Julian. What are your thoughts about ISO? Is this something which you see happening, first of all, within your organization and then in India? And Julian, more from China, Hong Kong, Singapore area, are you seeing adoption of ISO, and are you as an organization ready to receive payment messages in ISO format?
Julian would like to go first. So, okay. So sure. Amit, as far as ISO 20022, it's essentially a global standard for financial messaging. And I think it's across multiple domains. So in India, I think a large value payments format called RTGS, or we call it as real-time gross settlement, is essentially compliant to ISO 20022. So if someone who has to say transfer payments, business to business, business to consumer, peer to peer, high value, the RTGS is used, which essentially is ISO compliant. Any trade related payments to be made, RTGS is used. And finally, I think, yeah, so as far as import payments are concerned, we continue to use the SWIFT platform for for making payments, or even for that matter, kind of issuing LCs are concerned. But ISO is not being implemented by an organization as such. It is being implemented more by the regulators and the banks, and then an interface is provided to the organization, basis which the organization makes payments.
Julian, what's your view on adopting and accepting payment messages in ISO format?
Yeah, for us, I mean, we're a company, right? So we certainly welcome any standardization and simplification of payment file format between banks, if that can result like cheaper and quicker cross-border transfers and better information for us, right? So, but honestly speaking, I think SWIFT had a few good initiatives in the past years. Like if I can recall, we had the EBAM like 10 years ago, and then the GPI payment tracking thing. Some of them, I mean, the idea really exciting, but some of them never took off. So I'm cautiously positive on this one, right? I think we welcome that, and if that can really bring benefit to corporate, we're happy to adapt to move on to this format. But then we will only do that if it's not only the ISO format accepted by bigger banks and major currency, right? I want to see that covers, or even like not the good guys, but also the what we call not bad guys, but still the currencies that require very unique information because of their foreign exchange control, for example, and then how I want to see that across all my countries and all banks, not just with US dollar or euro payment. And also, I think when we talk about cross-border transfer, cross-border clearing, there are also local clearing need to accept this ISO format as well, so we don't populate very different information in the file. When I make for example a sterling local payments, looks very, I mean, the file looks very different from a GBP cross-border payment, right? So I want to see more alignment on that. And also I think SWIFT say that they think major currency will adopt the ISO before 2025. I think it's still very long, and I think maybe there are some fintech solutions quicker than that can be rolled out before 2025. I don't know. I'm cautious. What's your view, Amit?
I think ISO is important, and across the world we are seeing also API standards getting aligned to ISO. So we have seen a lot of initiatives, including initiatives like PSD2 in Europe, where most of the API field formats are now getting more and more aligned to ISO format. So I don't think we will achieve full convergence ever, but I think we will get to a point in the next 2 to 3 years where there is a high level of convergence, where all of the payment messages themselves are standardized, and the APIs through which some of these payment messages are transferred will be more aligned to ISO format, which will raise interoperability. But you did raise a very, very interesting point, Julian, around cheaper and quicker. I think that creates a nice segue for the next question in terms of how can you share how much cost saving we can expect from APIs broadly, and Rachel, maybe the question to you first. What are we seeing here? What percentage of cost savings can we expect as against more traditional point-to-point or host-to-host connectivity?
Interesting question, Amit. And maybe I'll start by answering or adding a little bit to the ISO conversation, because yeah, so from a bank perspective, we have to be compliant. So our cross-border transactions have to be compliant by November 2022. And I think what we're taking from that, or trying, it is a mandatory requirement. So we really look at what other benefits you can get from that. And I think the richer structured data that you will get as part of the ISO standard format is going to help AML, fraud monitoring and the likes. But it also will allow you to get richer data perspective, from a MIS perspective. And this is where we have to work with our clients to actually be able to demonstrate to them that you will get benefits by adhering to the ISO format. But going back to Zulin's, if it's only a certain subset of your flows, then you still don't get that benefit. So I think it's kind of, there's an onus on banks to be a big part of this kind of push for standardization, and then ultimately work with clients to understand how that will benefit them, and then how do you get that richer data to work for you in the future. But going back to APIs, and to be honest, in terms of the cost of APIs, like I really think that once you have standardization on APIs, that's where you have kind of standard protocols around APIs, and we don't have kind of point-to-point connections. I think that's where clients should actually see much bigger benefit from a connectivity perspective in terms of the technical cost of actually connecting. I don't have a number, to be honest, and I can't give a kind of a number on that, but I really do expect it to 50% less cost than it currently is. But I think the other benefits, which is not just the cost of it, is what Zulin kind of described earlier, is where you can get multiple benefits out of it. So how can you make a full end-to-end decision? You get your balance information, then you make a decision that actually I want to do a cash pool. I actually want to move that money into a different account or a different currency, and you trigger that automatically off the back of that balance API, account balance API push message that then triggers another step in your workflow. And I think that's where, and that's I can't quantify that, but that's where for me APIs will start to give you real operational end-to-end operational benefits. So how do you embed it totally into your end-to-end flow, so it triggers an API, triggers another step that triggers a decision that allows you to manage your business better.
Brilliant. And Richard, you talked about a fantastic use case which you have implemented, where you have automated the coupon with the end consumer. Were you able to quantify the business benefits or percentage of time saving or money saving which you have achieved through that process?
So I would not be able to mention this in the forum, but again, some of the benefits that we instantly saw in terms of this particular use case was largely around crashing the time from, as I mentioned, 60 days to 90 days. That itself was a major use case for us to implement the solution. The second thing, obviously, is that enables us to get access to the consumer, right? And when you get access to the consumer, you are able to kind of curate a product for the consumer, because otherwise it used to be the distributor and the retailer, and we never even knew who our consumer was. So I think there are multiple use cases of an API that one can think of, rather than just putting a number to it. So if I may say.
Understood. And I'm conscious that we are really at the top of our hour, and perhaps, and I don't see any more questions, so perhaps this is the right time for us to close the event. And I would really like to thank Julian, Rachel, and Rishit for sharing your insights. Really enjoyed speaking to you and understanding your perspectives. I hope the audience also had a great time, and if there are any further questions, do send it to the organizers, and we will try to answer a few of them offline if possible. Thank you again, and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Amit.